Hello and welcome to this RSA International India Hour. We're afraid our chair has got a few issues with his internet. So my name is Dr. Alex Holmes and I am the Communications Manager from the Regional Studies Association. And I'm delighted to be able to welcome today our speakers for this India International Hour. The RSA has several territorial networks around the world. And we're particularly proud of our Indian members, and we're hoping that this will be a very, very interesting session. So we have two speakers with us today, and our chair, Mohammed Firoz, who will join with us as soon as he's sorted out his technical issues. So first up will be Professor Joy Sen from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, in India, and he will be speaking on controls and communication cybernetics of a system of cities in regions through creative industries. Welcome, Joy, and I will pass the floor over to you.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Holmes. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this forum. I hope I'm audible. So with your permission, I'm just going to share a small presentation, which is about 20 slides. So it's about half a minute each. That sums up to 20 minutes. Should be that way. Yeah. So let's start and kindly confirm that it's visible. Yeah. Great. So I'm on full slide right now. I'm also hopeful that the observers on the other side can see the slide. So it's really a pleasure to say it again, to share the floor with another great scholar, Dr. Lakshmi Priya Rajendran, and of course, my very near dear former scholar, Dr. Firoz Mohammed, who heads the School of Planning and Architecture at National Institute of Technology, Calicut. Creative industries, yeah, it's absolutely a real hope in the world of today because it checks the controls and the communication in a regional economy. I'll try to and keep the presentation at a very simple level with some simple examples so that the outcome of the presentation becomes meaningful and significant to the observers and the learned audience who is right here. Let's look at the economy. The economy is something like this. The economy is very large at the macrocosm. A lot of industries sending out smokes, not sending out smokes, primary, secondary, and tertiary industries. And what happens on the other hand, it's all of us, which is the microcosm. Each one of us, either we are working in an industry or we are doing something which is connected to the industry. So the industry pumps out what we call payments to us. And when we grow rich, we send it back to the banks, and the banks send it back to the industry, which is investments. If we have extra money, it goes to the government pumps it back to the industry. So the industry and the economy rolls, which is called the cycle or the circular form of economy. If the economy is very strong and robust, then we send our money abroad, we start importing things. So when you are sending money out, the goods come back to us. And then from abroad, the money comes back to us again, which is the export of a country. So this is a very ideal case, a wonderful case of economy of any country in the world, what we call the export-based model. Yeah. I mean, to look at it at a very simple level, the controls are good. The communication between the various nodes of economy are also good. But when we look at the world right now, that's not the case. There are highs and lows. There are shades of lights and darkness, the shades of bigger investments and no investments, and there's shades of uncertainty. So that brings us to the next slide. And I'll make this very simple. This is an outcome of a lot of research that we have done at IIT Kharagpur. I'll start from the bottom right. Our world is right now going through some major issues, problems, and crisis. Whether we accept it or don't accept it, that is our problem. But I think A very large portion of the global population is going through a socio-cultural crisis. There's a fight between modernity and tradition, to keep things very simple. There's a huge issue at the climatic level. When I was a student in the US, I read his books. That's US Vice President Al Gore, who also wrote that beautiful movie and the book, The Inconvenient Truth. So that's one place where a lot of our investment gets sucked into. We lose a lot of our money because of our environmental and ecological imbalances. I won't say anything about the second one, because we are all familiar with what is happening to the world right now. The figures that you see in this slide are figures which are likely from 15, 20 years back. We don't know how many times these two countries have shaken hands and how many times they've gone to war. And a huge portion of the economy, a huge portion of the production gets sucked into the tensions that happens at the global and the local level. I'll stop there. But the concern today for today's presentation is number one, which is the economic imbalance. And this is one of the greatest economists ever born on the history of humankind. That's Jose Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate. And he wrote a book called The Price of Inequality, where he has shown the huge imbalances that happens to our economy because of the fights between the microcosm, that is all of us, and the big economy, the big players, the big industries, which are all up there. They promise a lot, but finally the development does not trickle down to the average population of a region or a country or the nation. So the wealth of the nation keeps on shifting from one group of ownership to another group of ownership. And the situation is so volatile that we are in a world of mergers and acquisitions. The companies are changing, the employment profile is changing. It's because the way we have looked at our economy is very big, big industries, big production, big employment, and big way of doing things. It is as if we have reduced our viewpoint into something very specific, that we cannot have an economy without these big things. And that's a kind of a problem which we call a reductionist approach to development. The next slide is pretty debatable, but there are different ways of looking at it. So the impact of reductionism in the name of science has actually played a huge havoc. These are wonderful people. With full respect and regards for them, they have contributed to the last 300 years of human civilization, and we all owe a lot to them. But the paradigm which has been put forward by Bacon, Darwin, Freud, Descartes, and Newton has pushed the world order to a reductionist paradigm of economic development. If you read the lines, I'm not going to read it, by Carolyn Stevens from the University of Berkeley, California, a historian of science and economics. She says, we have reached a time where these situation needs to be looked into in a very critical way, and we start questioning the absoluteness of the reductionism that we have in our order. And that really creates a huge imbalance, a huge criticality, and a huge loss of controls and communications in our economy. That's where my focus is for today's paper. So our obsession with competition and coercion in economy has really pushed us somewhere where the upper half of an economy, big cities, megalopolis, systems of cities on the one hand, and the distribution of regions and villages and farmlands on the other hand, are very much disconnected. So we have Walter Izard, one of the greatest regional planners born in the history of American planning. I was taught into his books, followed by John Friedman, and then Paul Krugman, and many others like Sen, Amartya Sen, Dr. Mohibul Haq, and Professor Muhammad Yunus, who is currently the advisor of the government of Bangladesh in its volatile times. So these are the people who have really questioned in the way I am questioning today in this presentation. In fact, they have questioned large economic investments and big economic investments, and then they think there is a discrepancy, there is a disconnect between the very large and the very small. And to link the two extremes, we need to work at an intermediate level, at a basic meso level, where the solution is. And that's where creative industries, which is the meso economy, the small, the medium, the creative, the cultural, the distributed, the folk driven, in the words of Patrick Geddes, if I would say, if it all belongs, if it all belongs. So with this, I just dip into a bit of science. The same thing is happening with science, like planning. We look into big things and we look into small things. But today, if you look at science, the science of large structures and the science of small structures are largely disconnected till we don't connect them through a meso level, which is the human being. The location of the scientist, the location of the farmer, the location of the industrialist, the location of the labor, the microcosm and the macrocosm, the two extremes are linked to the mesocosm. So that's very important, and that's the focus of my presentation. And I'll just end with this idea with some examples and a little more thing. So what you see on this slide is an inflection or a bifurcation, which has made the reductionist linear way of looking at the economy into a more non-linear circular form. So what's happening in basic science is also happening in urban and regional science. And it's very much happening with the aid of the creative economic paradigm. I have realized this in my last 25 years. I work both in profession and also in academics. I'll share a small example before I cut off my presentation, and that will give you some evidence why I'm saying that. So what is happening is that in the emerging science today, the urban and regional sciences, complexity, nonlinear dynamics, and networking is becoming far, far more important than simply looking at things from big and small and a very linear way of a trickle-down development and things like that. So between the scales that are large and that are small, we need to look in between. It's almost like a serpent eating its own tail. It comes from organic chemistry, a dream which Kekule had seen, and that was a discovery of organic chemistry. That's very, very interesting. So I'm not getting into that. So I'll come to a basic science which was developed by a scientist about 2.5 centuries back. That was Clerk Maxwell. He was from England, and he's considered to be the father of modern science. And he said that any system gives out feedbacks to the systems around it, and the systems around it gets the feedbacks back to the system. And the more and more you have the dialogue between the two, then the controls and the communications improve and you develop a larger system. Economy is just one example. So the parable of a person on the cycle is a wonderful example of the science of controls and communication, which is cybernetics. The example becomes even more evident when you look at it from the view of someone rowing the boat. How many strokes you have on the left paradigm, and how many strokes you have on the right paradigm. And with all the strokes on the left and the right, finally, how you balance out your final movement, which is the movement of the boat in the sea of uncertainty, in the economics of uncertainty, is actually the parable of cybernetics, which is the science of controls and communication. And that's the link between either the very large or the very small, the links between the very big and the very little, the links between the sacred or the profane, and the links between the developed and the underdeveloped, or the links between the global north and the global south. So I think in here, the role of the creative industries come out to be very important. I'll give you a very simple example that comes from built environment, which is architecture. So if you go back by a few decades only in the 1930s and 40s, the world architecture at large was coming out from a preceding stage where all buildings almost look like a Greek temple or a Roman temple, to a style which you see out here. So this is a building in Delhi designed by Shivnath Prasad, and this is a building designed by McKinnell and his team at Boston, which is called the Boston City War Hall. But what happened in the next 3-4 decades, these buildings were not accepted fully by the fraternity of built environmentalists. Yeah, and there were feedbacks back into the system to revive it back to a more important style, which was just not the international style, but it was called the post-international style. So with an example of architecture or built environment, we can simply prove that every stage of development that we are in is actually a flow of inputs and outputs, and also of the feedback where the output becomes the input into the system, and the systems gets transformed to the next level, to the next image of time as time flows. So this is something which is very, very interesting. So if you look at the central portion of this slide, you can see what I just showed you in the preceding slide. And this is how the world changed. We moved on from the Middle Ages through the colonial ages to the modern ages. And we are right now in the postmodern age, and we are just entered the digital age. And in every age, there has been some problems and solutions. The communications and the controls to industrialization, the good thing, pollution, the bad thing, the World War, the bad thing, but the good thing, a lot of inventions and progresses. Then the advent of satellite communication technology, the good thing, the bad thing, lifestyle diseases, and we just move on and on. So what I mean to say that at every stage, there is a movement of controls and communication. Now, this is a slide we should conjecture upon very much. In the last few years or so, I have been personally with my scholars working on this. So the science of controls and communication, if inducted into the science of urban and regional planning, with the aid of creative industries, throws important light. So if you look at the center of the slide, the international style, which we used to see mostly in the 40s, 50s, and the 60s, became the post-international style, designed by Robert Venturi and others in the 70s and the 80s. And now we don't have that anymore. We have the digital style, which is like by Norman Foster designing this building in London, or Frank Gehry or anyone else designing buildings elsewhere. So there is a constant change in our demands and supply, and this is how we need to look at the economic changes and the possibilities of its movement. This slide, I'm just going to hop on a little bit. This is a huge contribution from a group of scientists who are known as the fathers of cybernetics. It started in the 40s, which is called the Macy conferences. It started at MIT in New Cambridge in the state of Massachusetts. That's Norbert Wiener, one of the disciples of Andrew Whitehead, and that's Claude Shannon. He's very famous for information sciences. Shannon's entropy is in his name. And this is Warren McCullough and Warren Pitts, who started the neural networking. And they together, along with Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead, started with what we call the creative cybernetics. That means there is something in the system which has to look beyond the system and get connected. So I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation. So what is happening to restore the slide which I have shown you right in the beginning, which is the circular flow of income that comes from the very large, the very big economy, the Bells, the Mitsubishi, the Boeing, the huge Tata Group. That's not everything about an economy, because in times of uncertainties, in times of stock market crashes, in times of uncertainties in the shares and debentures and the mutuals, and the mergers and acquisitions that we have in our economy, if there is one layer of economy which can save and keep this cycle continuous, that's the meso level, the creative industries. So I'm going to end quickly in just about 2 to 3 minutes, giving an example of a project that we did under the funding of the British Council, the DFID, the Government of the United Kingdom. And this project was done with the Queen's Mary University of London. We just did it 2 years prior to COVID-19 years. And the project gave us a huge understanding of the economy of Bengal. We thought that there are industries, we thought there are other industries which backs up the economy of Bengal. There are jute industries, there are iron and steel industries, and there are clothing industries. But our work for this mapping, the creative economy of a celebration which is called the Durga Puja, it's around the mother goddess, the idea of God as a sacred feminine, which is well connected with the women's emancipation movement around the world. So India has, a very strange definition of that in terms of its divinity, and it's a big celebration, especially in east of India, especially in Calcutta, where it has been there for the last 400 years. And to our amazing discovery, we found out that about 60% of Bengal's economy is being rolled and cycled and moved by a cultural festival, and about thousands of creative industries that are connected around this festival. And the festival of Durga Puja, which is going to happen in 2025, starts getting planned from 2023, and which shall happen in 2026 that starts from 24, and which shall happen in 27 starts from 25. So there's a constant rolling in the cycles of time of the various industries like eateries, like clothing, like apparel, like decor, like fashion, like music, like cultural, different kinds of podcast, different kind of innovation. And to our surprise, we came to know that this cultural festival churns out about 60% of resilience of Bengal's economy, not the big industries, not the huge industries, the meso industries of Bengal charges. So we did a fairly satisfactory things, and we got the results from large surveys, from the retail, from the crafts, from the film, from the food, from the beverages, from the advertisement. And we had a wonderful collaboration with Queen's Mary College of London University, and we had experts from the British Council. So I'm very happy that I'm talking to the London or the United Kingdom crowd today, experts like Professor Alex Holmes and others, and also Dr. Lakshmi, who is also an expert. So together, the people from London and people from India, we had a discovery that the creative industries of Bengal is actually a savior. And the savior is not from the macro level, it comes from the meso level. And this is a YouTube, which is evident in the net. You can just save this. Durga Puja Surveys 2019, mapping of creative economy. So if someone is interested, you can have a look at this YouTube, and you'll see how we have collected the narratives and the surveys of this very large pulsar. So the 2005 ISOCUF Congress, which is organized by Hague, the Netherlands, calls this the pulsar economy driven by the creative economy. I met Charles Landry in Bilbao, and last year, one of my students who is a faculty in a college in India, in Rourkela, he met Charles again. So Charles is one of the great proponents of creative industries. So what I heard from him was realized by me about 15 years later through projects and everything. So maybe some of these things are readable, some of these things. So this entire report is available on the website. It's available on the website of British Council India Division, and it's also available on the website of many other divisions. We have done it together, and you can see the whole team from IIT Kharagpur and from Queen's Mary University of London. It was very satisfactory, and finally it became extremely satisfactory because along with other reports, we had sent this report to the UNESCO, and that is why about a little more than a year back, the United Nations offered one of world's largest intangible heritage tag to the celebration of Durga Puja, just not as a cultural festival, but as a marker of the revival of India's economy and Bengal's economy, where I think the British culture during the colonial times was also a very integral part of. So we did a very sensitive, very significant, and a very integral study of taking the two cultures together and looking at the life-saving device that's provided by the creative industries at the meso level to improve on the controls and the communications. So it is quite true that to save the economy and to save the right controls and develop the right communication between the ordinary man and the extraordinary economy, the creative industries remain as the future of the world. There's no doubt about it. And this is where the economy actually gets reassured. And this is my first slide, which I show once more for a recap, for a recapitulation. So I'll end with the quotation of a great man. That's Werner Heisenberg. And Heisenberg, the great quantum physicist, says that it is probably true quite generally that in the history of human thinking, the most fruitful developments frequently take place at those points. That's very important. At those points where two different lines of thought meet, the big and the small, and they can only meet if there is the presence of an intermediary in between, a connect, a two-way ladder between the large and the small, the meso level. So that meso economy is actually driven by the controls and the communications, the power of the right controls and the right communications that comes from the creative industries. So this paper, this presentation is mostly a thought paper, but there are a lot of evidence. I just showed you one in the last 4 or 5 slides, which is a life project, and we are still trying to get into a phase 2, maybe a few years from now. So thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your patient hearing. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Holmes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for trying. We'll just introduce the next speaker, Aljacinda. So I'm back again. Sorry, Firoz has had lots of issues with his technical connections today, but it's my great pleasure to stand in for him again and to introduce Lakshmi Priya Rajendran. She's from the Bartlett School of Planning at UCL, and she is here today to talk to us about informality as a creative framework for resilience and development. So at this point, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. So a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people who are joining from across the globe. I'm Lakshmi Priya Rajendran from the Bartlett School of Architecture, and it's an honor to speak to you all as a part of the RSA International Hour with a focus in India, which is where quite a lot of my work is grounded in. And my presentation is titled Informality as a Creative Framework for Resilience and Inclusive Development. So before I move on to the presentation, I would like to set the stage, why informality, and why understanding that is quite critical in the current urban planning and design discourse. So when we talk about informality, particularly in the context of the urban development and planning, it often conjures as images of unplanned settlements, ad hoc infrastructures, and systems that operate outside the formal regulations. While informality is frequently seen as a challenge, again, linked to poverty, marginalization, and vulnerability, I want to shift the narrative today, where I would want to view informality as a source of innovation, resilience, and inclusivity, especially in the rapidly urbanizing context in the global South. And of course, India is a very good example of the situation. Moving on, the central point of debate in urban planning and design, particularly in the context of the global South, revolves around how cities are understood, shaped. I would also say, how cities are misunderstood. And much of this discourse are traditionally being dominated by a Eurocentric lens, where urban phenomena is often framed as disorder, fragmentation, and discontent, as cited from Tonke's work. And this perspective tends to view informal and the unregulated as deviation from the normal and needing to be corrected or controlled. However, we all are definitely aware of Robinson's and Roy's work, which clearly points out there's a growing recognition of the need to decolonize these perspectives. And this involves acknowledging the inherent power dynamics which shape the urban spaces and also the discourses surrounding them. So rather than viewing urban informality purely as a problem, it is increasingly being positioned as a critical site for analysis. And this shift is crucial for developing a more inclusive and equitable urban strategies that recognize the complex realities of cities in the global south. So this slide is sort of giving a flavor of the different conceptualization and the emergent frameworks which looks into urban informality. And this is not exhaustive, though. So the occupancy urbanism by Benjamin clearly highlights the creative adaptive strategies which people take, and the notions of fluidity by Simone shows how dynamic these ever-shifting nature of urban spaces are, and it clearly transcends static definitions of being formal or informal. And finally, looking at informality beyond informality as a phenomena, but more as a principle which underpins the urban processes and as a practice where it shapes the everyday life of people. So my work is interested. I'm particularly very much interested in exploring an alternative and creative approach to conceptualizing the informal public realm, drawing insights from the peri-urban regions of the global south, which is also one area which I'm very interested in, the peripheries and how these have implications both for the urban and the rural, but also in terms of how, in the overall city formation and transformation. So how all of this can enable community resilience. And as I said earlier, the peri-urban region is something which is very, very interesting and very unique sort of a phenomena which is developing globally. So if you look at peri-urban, to be in very simple terms, it exists at the interface of the urban and the rural. So the idea of the peri-urban itself is as messy as it is fascinating, because it's a space that defies easy categorization, and there have been lots of scholarship which debates how should we define the peri-urban. And it blurs the lines between the city and the countryside, and challenging the neat definitions, which we often like to use when we are trying to understand the typology of urban transformation. So some say peri-urban is hard to pin down because there's no clear-cut definition itself, and while others argue it is precisely the ambiguity that makes it so interesting. And rather than thinking a rural, peri-urban, and urban as separate worlds, more and more people are starting to see them as part of a single interconnected system. The peri-urban is where the different systems, urban and the rural systems, collide, creating a space where both urban and the rural features coexist, sometimes harmoniously and sometimes, of course, very conflicting and not so harmoniously. So understanding the peri-urban itself is not straightforward. So it's a concept still being debated and redefined by scholars from different disciplines and practitioners alike. But this complexity also makes it a very rich area for exploration, personally for me, especially when it comes to thinking about informality, resilience, and how communities adapt and thrive in these in-between spaces. So a bit of contextualization in the Indian context. So as I said, the peri-urban is a global phenomena, and within India, as we all know that the neoliberal policy making definitely understands cities alone as growth engines, attracting investment that drive national development. So as they expand, they push businesses and residents outwards, transforming the surrounding rural areas into the peri-urban regions. And there's clearly a lack of planning and policy attention, which leads to poor infrastructure and uneven access to amenities, so leading to quite a lot of socioeconomic and environmental problems. And if you look at the current policies, also they do not, they're mainly focused on the metropolitan growth and often overlook these peri-urban needs. And the National Urban Mission also lacks a comprehensive framework for these transitional areas. So there is definitely some recognition of these areas, but still they are largely neglected in policy, leading to marginalization of the rural communities in particularly. So So the area which I have been looking at, in terms of the peri-urban geographies is in the down south, in Chennai, a metropolitan city, and what I thought was interesting when you look at the peri-urban and the informal is that while these appear to be very fragmented and loose, but and which also strongly, sharply contrasts with the more structure and the regulated urban core. But the informal nature of these spaces offers the greater flexibility, how these could be understood, and also present some unique challenges, of course, which comes along with it. So whatever work I'm presenting is not just one project, but quite a lot of smaller projects, bigger projects together, but overall looking at the peri-urban and the informal. So this particular project, which I'm touching upon to give an introduction to the peri-urban and the informal, is where we were trying to understand both the difficulties and the opportunities within the peri-urban Chennai, focusing on St. Thomas Mount area, where we wanted to understand the transformation, how things are changing, but also wanted to know how these changes have an impact on the lived experiences of the people. So there were quite a lot of data collection methods which we used. As I said, it was not just about the transition, the transformation, what we're trying, but also trying to understand the perceptions of the peri-urban, what the everyday life meant for people and the residents who living in these peri-urban regions. So we conducted quite a lot of interviews, participatory mapping with the residents, trying to understand their everyday routes, how they navigate these spaces, and we used quite a lot of creative methods, as you see, and we also conducted focus group with key stakeholders, including urban planners, designers, NGOs, community representatives, and more importantly, the residents. It was quite interesting to have this focus group where you see the end user and also the decision makers, trying to talk about the perceptions of the peri-urban. We also did quite a lot of photo documentation of the place to see what peri-urban looks like and what it means to people. So we were showing photographs when we were asking some question, asking people to draw their everyday, when we did the participatory mapping with the during the interviews. So while the project itself was looking at quite a lot of policy making, environmental challenges, we were also looking at particularly at the public realm. So some of the emergent themes which were linked to the public realm, which was emerging, was the first one is we call it as loose affordance, which highlights the flexible nature of the peri-urban environment. The lack of rigid structure allows residents to adapt and customize the spaces to their needs, fostering a strong sense of place and community. While I'm talking about the emergent themes, I leave it to the audience to read through the quote, which kind of summarizes why we called it as a loose affordance. For example, this is a playground slash ground which allows quite a lot of multiple uses, and how people don't how people appropriate their place, appropriate the space depending upon the age and the user group which actually occupies that space. So the second theme we thought was more focused on situated transactions, where it captured the everyday interactions and exchanges that occur in these spaces. And these localized activities strengthen the social ties and deepens residents' sense of belonging. So this is a sort of a semi-permanent market where it is not just about buying something and going, but there's quite a lot of more meaningful engagement, both with the vendors, but also amongst the residents, which makes this more than a very functional space. And coming to the other theme is, we call it as an inclusive complexity, where we see how these some urban spaces support a mix of activities and functions, and this diversity creates vibrant, multifunctional environment that encourage community interaction and engagement. It's interesting, kind of reflect upon this theme particularly, because initially we had it as an inclusive chaos, and then we were reflecting, thinking that chaos is something probably for an outsider, but we really wanted to speak about the themes, about the urban spaces in Chennai, but representing Global South, from the insider. So we thought, no, chaos is something which is not capturing the richness of the place. So from inclusive chaos, we changed to inclusive complexity. Again, no, trying to go away from the Eurocentric way of looking at urban spaces. Anything an outsider doesn't understand need not be chaotic. It is just complex, too complex for an outsider. And the fourth one, which personally I thought was quite important and often not given as much as importance when we look into the urban spaces and social innovation, is the negotiated transgression, which refers to how people navigate and adjust boundaries and regulation within these informal spaces. And this flexibility enables residents to creatively use and transform their surroundings, enhancing their attachment to the area. So, for me, informal practices in peri-urban spaces definitely play a crucial role in building social capital and fostering micro-resilience within community. So, if you look at the diagram onto your left, it is more of trying to come away from the dichotomous approach of the urban and the rural, but looking at peri-urban in a more holistic manner, where you don't see peri-urban just as a place of transaction between the urban and the rural, but a place-based, but grounded in also a place-based conception, which is where you try to also see the richness of the informality which exists in these spaces. So, such practices will help us in building. When I say such practices, the informality practices helps in building the social capital by encouraging interactions and collaboration among residents, and through informal networks and community activities, people develop trust and mutual support and shared resources, which strengthen these social ties and enhances collective well-being. And furthermore, we strongly believe that these practices contribute to this micro-resilience. Again, something which is very much taken for granted within the urban planning and resilience discourse, which is often looked at in a very zoomed out manner. But micro-resilience happens in a very, very everyday scale, and the scale is too local. So this sort of a micro-resilience allows communities to adapt and respond to challenge effectively and creatively. And the flexibility and the creativity in how spaces are used helps residents to deal with socioeconomic and environmental stresses, making them more resilient. So this perspective of urban informality often opens new opportunities for planning and development. It suggests that understanding people, place, and community building together can lead to more effective and inclusive strategies. So for me, it is very important to understand the interplay of informal processes and interactions as a key point where we need to look into when we are talking about social innovation. So at this point, I would like to talk about a work which is forthcoming in our book, jointly edited by Nazapi and Asakul, with whom I've collaborated quite a lot in terms of my work in urban informality itself. So this book is about learning resilience from the global south, reconceptualizing urban informality in urban planning and design. So in this book, what we are trying to do is we are trying to understand urban informality and the processes and this interaction as to be conceptualized more as a dialogue, and where we not only acknowledge the multifaceted nature of these exchanges, but also understanding them as dialogue allows us to pave way for a deeper exploration of the diverse relationships and dynamics which they encompass. And within the urban planning and the design discourse, the intricate and the ever-evolving interplay of global and the local conditions necessitates a close examination of the relationships from these various actors. And we also think these relationships serves as a catalyst for empowering both actors and the actants in formulating creative, resilient strategies. So to gain a more comprehensive understanding, what we were proposing was to understand informality as a dialogue, as I mentioned, and this dialogue may encompass conflicting, negotiating, and transgressing dynamics driven by intentions ranging from parasitic to symbolic to creative. So within this conceptual framework, we delineate 4 primary positions So we call it as positions rather than sort of an end product. A position is something which can be shifting, depending upon the situation. And the situation, we kind of hook it within political will and the social capital. So depending upon how much the social capital or the political will is, these positions might move or change. So within these 4 positions, the first one, what we call it as a parasitic position. So in this scenarios, communities are exploited and marginalized with little meaningful engagement, and they face severe socioeconomic vulnerabilities and have minimum social capital. And the other extreme of this position is the hegemonic position, where here there's a very top-down approach to governance. While there's so much of political will, but that is very much top-down, but the community voices are still suppressed. So this results in evictions and displacements, deepening feelings of disempowerment and lack of social capital. And the third one, which we think is quite important, highlighted in the red, is the position where there's an active resistance and communities push back against limitations and find creative ways to adapt. Strong social networks help them overcome regulatory constraints and build resilience. And the fourth one is the symbiosis position. In sort of an ideal state, there's a positive collaborative dialogue between all the stakeholders, and the cooperation leads to effective, innovative solutions and strengthens community resilience through shared responsibility and social capital. So understanding these positions helps us to see how communities navigate and respond to challenges, paving the way for more inclusive and resilient urban planning. So when we try to, so these are 4 positions, but it is not as simple as this. There's quite a lot of things which are happening. Why these are there and what are the interconnections between all these, and there's quite a lot of overlap between almost all the 4 positions as well. So for instance, if you see the parasitic position, often struggles due to outdated planning practices, which are grounded in colonial practices and thinking and policies that marginalize communities. And this position overlaps with the hegemonic positions, worsening the spatial inequalities. And if you look at the local politics, often leading to the top-down planning that overlooks the unique socio-cultural practices of community instead of integrating the local needs. And these plans might replicate global and the Western models, which weakens the community ties and the social capital. And despite these challenges, there is hope. So the transgressive position, which we said earlier is quite important, offers a chance for positive change. Communities are finding creative ways to navigate challenges and push back against traditional power structures. And this position offers new governance approach and encourages progressive dialogues. But what is quite important here is the transitional phase, where between the ideal state and the transgression is where we think all the creative and the co-created alternative urbanism approaches can actually be there. So the period between the pushing back and creating new system is where we see innovative solutions and the resilient communities emerges. And this phase, we think, is crucial for developing alternative urban design strategies that are inclusive, adaptable, and also creative. So by understanding and embracing these dynamics, we can create better strategies for informal settlements. And it's about promoting dialogue, collaboration, and recognizing the strengths of the informal communities and the level of social and the creative innovation these communities can bring forth for enabling resilient and equitable urban spaces is quite important. And finally, I would like to end with this quote by Edward Casey: "To be is to be in place," which is the quote which I used, to mark the first page in my PhD as well. Because for me, this quote kind of reflects the fact that urban informality is often misunderstood, reduced to a mere disorder of marginalization in the context of urban planning. However, at its core, informality presents something far more profound, deep, often the invisible bonds between people and the places which they call as home is neglected. And these connections are not incidental, and they are bedrock for resilience, creative social innovation, and key to inclusive development in cities. So understanding informality means recognizing these intricate relationships that individuals and communities have with their environments, and these bonds foster creativity, adaptability, and unique kind of strength that formal structures often overlook or even lack, I would say. So in exploring urban informality, we uncovered not just the challenges, but also the opportunities to build cities that are more creative, localized, inclusive, and reflective of the diverse ways people live and thrive in. So with this, I would like to end my talk, and I would like to thank everyone for attending our talk. It's a pleasure to share the stage with Professor Joy, and I would like to thank once again RSA International Set webinar team to give me this opportunity to present my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi. I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
Yeah,
Firoz.
my
Yes, you
sincere
are.
apology.
You are.
My
You are.
sincere apology as the chair. I could not join from my it was the entire campus is out of internet suddenly. Anyway, so now we'll move on to the question and answer session.
Hello, Firoz.
Yes.
There is a question in the Q&A box.
Yeah, please. I'm not. Can you take the question? I'm sorry, Alex. I'm seriously.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
This is a question for Lakshmi from Vidya, who says, I quite like how you link these two, social capital, micro resilience. I'm a bit curious to learn about the use of the word communities, the fact that there are inequalities within communities that cut across caste, gender, amongst others. Have you thought about the significance of difference within the community, and how would that reflect in the creative urban framework for planning, design, and policy making?
Great. Thank you, Vidya. It's a great question, and something which I'm very reflective of for every single project or every single exploration or examination what I do within the urban informality. As you clearly say, especially within the setting like in India, caste, I would say, plays such an important role. And so what I presented is more a framework for understanding urban informality. Of course, if I'm going to look at, the entire framework, what I show towards the end might have to be reworked, revisited, revised, changed for every aspect of it, within the caste. Even within caste, if I'm looking at Dalit community, when I'm looking at a different, Yadava community, I'm looking at a Brahmin community, again, the framework would change, so all of it, what you're saying, plays such an important role within how the power dynamics and the power relations exist between all these four positions. So I'm not trying to answer your question, but kind of echo what you're saying. I kind of align with it. And I would also like to say that community as a term itself, as you rightly pointed out, has all of these dimensions. And so if I'm going to, it would be one of my other upcoming project is where I'm currently working on is looking at climate justice in the urban peripheries, and looking particularly at the marginalized women community from the Dalit community, because often in the urban peripheries, if you see, there's quite a lot of issues around who owns the property, but even more this issue is pronounced, and very, very interesting and very important to understand is what happens to this landless women, the existing patriarchy, what it does to this severely marginalized women. So so that is something like you need to do several of different research trajectory, not different research trajectory, but trajectories which would come out of these larger framework, I suppose. Hopefully, I sort of at least if not answered your question, kind of addressed the point what you've asked me.
Okay, it looks like Firoz has dropped again. I can see my my alter ego popping up again. I think we're very close to the end of this webinar. I've actually got stacks of questions, I think, for Joy, but I feel that there's probably not enough time for these. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Lakshmi and Joy and the persistence of Firoz for trying and trying and trying to connect for the duration.
Yeah, I'm still keeping on trying, Alex.
Yeah. And also, I'd like to very much thank the patience of our participants. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a really enlightening couple of discussions that we've had today. Some really, really interesting things. The video has, obviously the webinar has been recorded and will go public this afternoon, and I'm sure that links will be shared with all the attendees. Please do share this with your network, because the dissemination of this research is paramount, really, because it's crossing so many different things. Certainly, Joy, with your crossing over from the micro to the macro and the sciences, and then having the kind of communications and the humanities in the middle, is a very, very interesting perspective, which I think that actually does need to be shared with the kind of, you know, a much wider audience, so that discussion can be taken further. So on that note, we have 1 minute to go. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you also to Ritesh for kind of standing in and helping out with the internet connections. I hope everybody has enjoyed the session. Please keep an eye out on the Regional Studies Association website for forthcoming events, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to Nicola also.
Thank you.